By doing that can allow you to fail fast. And fail fast is part of speed. You are not always going to be successful, but you should get a few shots on goal before your company goes out of business. Right now, it's too many. One shot on goal, you miss, you're done.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Things are crazy, aren't they? The new administration's making all sorts of changes, which is a fun, sad, interesting thing to watch. But the news that's been in the headlines for the last few days has been this AI company called DeepSeek. Have you paid attention to this?
Yes. Oh, wow. This happened a week before we're recording this. So there's a lot of things up in the air, but there's been a lot of volatility when it comes to stock prices. So many people are looking at it, thinking of using it in different ways. I know developers that are machine learning scientists that are rethinking their architecture. It's incredible. What are some of the top things you're thinking of, Karl? I know we've been having some backdoors conversations, but tell us, share with our audience.
Okay, so the big news is that this Chinese team that came out of a hedge fund in China, and we should even step back a little bit further, because 2 years ago, China cracked down on a lot of financial instruments that were being developed. Some of the thinking is that China was watching what happens in the United States. Of course they do. And they saw all these really very smart people going straight from Ivy Leagues into finance. And there is this thinking, there's a narrative that a lot of people say, what good do these finance companies do? Mm-hmm. There's even another narrative that says that late stage capitalism is characterized by a lot of financialization and fake financial instruments. So you have really smart people doing things that are really making other people rich as opposed to doing things that are good for people. So China cracks down on financial instruments or financial tech. Smart people want to do things. And this small team built this new AI model that people had been using, but really over the last couple of days, they realized this thing is as powerful as ChatGPT, and the team built it for much less. I think the number is something like $5 million. And it is able to run on very cheap computer chips. So what that does is it puts into question this whole narrative that we're currently focused on, where so much money is being thrown at AI. And the idea is you're going to build these big data centers. We even mentioned one of the first Trump administration announcements was this $500 billion investment in data centers by SoftBank, ChatGPT, and Oracle, among others. And they're building this gigantic data center in Texas. But along with those data centers comes an increasing need for energy, and we don't have enough power plants to really feed all those data centers. So this new model comes along, and it can run on much cheaper chips. I think gaming chips. You don't need these big NVIDIA chips. NVIDIA loses more market cap in less than a day, throwing the whole stock market into turmoil. I just think it shows that there's a whole new narrative emerging. It's not necessarily US versus China, but we know this because we see it firsthand on the AI drug discovery side. There's new narratives to be evolved, and they're not necessarily going to come from the biologists. They're going to come from the mathematicians and people who are taking a different approach to programming these large language models so they can work much more efficiently with cheaper software. We work with a company that can do drug discovery on gaming chips, and they can do it really fast, and it's a new paradigm. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for companies to demonstrate new ways to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. The stock prices for those tech companies that plunged when the news first came out of DeepSeek are rebounding. They're not exactly all the way there yet. But you're right, Karl. I think Silicon Valley is break things, move fast. They might not have thought of things very deeply, but that's the sentiment. So they're really trying to move as fast as possible. But what is speed when you need something so complex and you need to take the time to think about it? You may think you have the smartest people on board, but there's even smarter people out there that can do more things with less resources, as we have seen with DeepSeek. But let's see what DeepSeek does. I'm excited. Let's give everyone a chance and see what works the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it reminds me of is there's a reason why there's so many great Russian mathematicians and programmers, and that is because they were very limited in the equipment that they had at the time. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, they had to work with what they had. And a lot of time, those limitations result in breakthroughs that you might neglect if you have all the money in the world thrown at you, if you're a startup or a bigger company.
That's a great point. Very great point.
So I think it's really interesting to continue to watch this. Limitations are another mother of invention.
Yeah, that's a concept in India. It's called Jugaad. being able to be innovative with limited resources, and you're able to create something meaningful and useful because you have certain parameters that you need to work within. But yeah, it's a global thing. We see that with the startups that we know they don't have many resources, but they've made such great progress with limited resources. So when we see some of these companies that raise so much money and you don't see any outcomes of those companies yet, and they've been around for 10 years, you start questioning what's going on. A lot of founders, their sentiment is like, if I only had a fraction of that money, if I only had a fraction of $100 million, just 10 million, they could go very far. So it's a great point. I'm excited to see what happens next in our materialistic world. As we go into our next topic, there's a lot of things happening in our materialistic world, but we've been looking at what's going on beyond our realm of physicality that we live in.
Yeah. So for those of you who pay attention to what's going on in the world of podcasts, there is a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes that was the #1 podcast on Spotify. It pushed Joe Rogan out of the way. And this podcast is about nonverbal autistic people and their ability to communicate telepathically. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the fact that the creator of this podcast documentary, so yes, you guys are listening about a podcast on a podcast, but this is the world we live in. And she goes and talks to the families. She interacts with spellers. They call nonverbal autistic people spellers because they're using either tablets to point to letters or they're using now apps to be able to communicate their thoughts. And it's so fascinating to learn that they think telepathically and that there's this group thing and it's real and they share very specific information. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of, let's just say, superpowers or supernatural powers that they demonstrate through visiting these people. And they do run some tests. They're speaking to different people that don't really know each other. And it's interesting that those people are sharing the same information. I don't want to give away too much, and I'm sure a lot of listeners of our podcast may have listened to Telepathy Tapes. So any thoughts on that as it relates to biotech, because we're getting there, is really interesting. The big takeaway for me as a scientist, but I'm also very spiritual as well, is that us verbal humans, because we talk so much, and especially those of us who are living in modern societies, of course, all of us are who are listening to podcasts. We live in a very materialistic world, and a lot of the concept is if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist, or if there's no evidence, it doesn't exist. But if you're a true scientist, you know that we just don't have the tools to observe a lot of things. And we know that mathematically, as we were talking about earlier, mathematics can theorize a lot of things, like higher dimensions, that's mathematically possible. And then also the quantum world, we are getting quantum computing. So to be able to soon observe that, hopefully, I know it's very complex, but a lot of things are moving very fast. Maybe it's complex now, but it will become a reality to be able to observe the quantum world and have the data to prove things out. We do observe the quantum world because we observe the process of photosynthesis every day. So, but there's a lot of things that could be happening in the quantum world that we just don't know and can't wrap our heads around. But the certain people that are more in tune with being able to, I guess, listen in other dimensions, but highly encourage people to listen to it, to keep an open mind and think that the truth is out there. Karl, you've listened to this. What did you think?
So I think it's super interesting. You told me about it. I'm glad I listened. I've listened to, I think, 4 episodes in. None of it surprises me because I do believe that there is a lot of things we don't understand. And like you said, they're unmeasurable. I think this is something that we have to be aware of when it comes to engineering biology. Every cell has a vibrational state. Once you go in there and you tinker with the genome, you're changing that vibrational state. We don't really know what the long-term effects are of that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it because we absolutely must and should, because that's what this podcast is about. But I think that there is a lot of mystery out there for us to uncover, and I'm really fascinated by it. I know you had watched the Brian Johnson documentary before I had. I watched it last night. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I felt like I watched a lot of it beforehand because I've been following him on YouTube and I saw him speak at an event before, but his background's very interesting. What I really liked about it was there's a whole storyline about how he got into this concept of don't die, the longevity movement, and the steps he's taken to have a very rigorous protocol. He's doing a lot of interventions. The criticism that was also on this Netflix documentary was They can't identify which therapies are actually working because he's doing too many things. It's very noisy.
Erum, you're totally right. What makes it hard for scientists to take what Brian is doing is he's taking so many things at once. And if scientists were doing this the way they would like to do it, they would do one intervention at a time. You pointed out that one of the things that he's taken is rapamycin, which is super interesting because it's a therapy that was discovered from a soil bacteria on the island of Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, which is used for organ rejection. So basically, if you get a lung transplant, a liver transplant, whatever, doctors will give you this to suppress your immune system. But then they've also done these studies on mice where they've discovered that mice that are given this in high doses end up living like 25% more. So there is this part of the longevity community that believes that this antibiotic can be used for longevity. And they show Brian taking 13 pills. So it's hard to know whether that's really going to have any effect because he's also taking over 100 pills every day.
Yeah, that is insane. But I think the very interesting point here is that this unique molecule was found in a very unique location. And what else is out there? I mean, that's
Right.
that's the heart of a lot of what we talk about here on the podcast is that biology is everywhere. It's so complex. It's highly diverse. And you never know where you're going to find the next breakthrough therapy or antibiotic or new type of microbe that can manufacture different ingredients or products. You just don't know. So we need to go out there and discover. When I heard about rapamycin's discovery on the Brian Johnson documentary, I was like, wow, what else is going on in the soil? I read somewhere that most of the microbial diversity and biomass is found underground. So what else is going on down there? So hopefully we have more people out there that are doing the discovery, going on expeditions and finding new biologies to help with our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
One of the things we wanted to share too with our guests is if you do have an idea to help with the reduction of greenhouse gases and helping with any environmental challenges, there's an excellent organization called the Homeworld Collective that we're fans of, that we're friends with. And they actually are putting out another fund towards bold ideas in greenhouse gas removal. So any projects that are around bio-enhanced rock weathering or atmospheric methane removal, they're accepting proposals that are addressing this compelling problem. So they have some grants available. I highly recommend that you look at the Homeworld Collective. We're going to work with them closely. They also have a podcast called the Climate Biotech Podcast. We'll put that all in the show notes. A great resource for anyone looking to grow their biotech idea.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into today's guest. One of the things we've been talking about a lot over the course of the last year is biomanufacturing, why it's important, why people are investing in it, why it's an advanced technology that helps localize production of advanced materials and also increases supply chain security and resilience. The person who we're bringing on is Doug Friedman. He's the CEO of BioMADE. BioMADE is a public-private partnership that seeks to secure the growth of the U.S. industrial biomanufacturing ecosystem and advance the non-healthcare bioeconomy. This is the first time we've talked to Doug, but we're very excited about this episode. Let's let Doug take it away. Doug Friedman, we are so happy to have you on the Grow Everything podcast. We have so much to talk about. So welcome to the Grow Everything podcast.
Thanks so much, Karl. Happy to be here.
So I want to kick it off and maybe be a little bit spicy since yesterday there was a big event that happened at the White House. When people listen to this, it'll be a week later. The Trump administration signed a deal with SoftBank, OpenAI, and Oracle, among others, investing $500 billion to create AI data centers. It's an enormous amount of money, and we know that's the potential to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But I'm curious from your point of view, as someone who's into biomanufacturing, what would $50 billion have done for our industry?
Yeah, Karl. So I saw that announcement yesterday too. And first I'll say, I was actually really happy to see that there's some immediate action. AI is a really important technology area. And I'm glad that there is attention on it and is also important for biotech and biomanufacturing. So I'm really glad that's happening. But to the point you just made, biotech and biomanufacturing is at a really unique point in time where you don't need to be talking about $500 billion, which is another way to say 500 billion.
Yes.
But $500 billion to have material impacts on this field. And so to the question you asked, $50 billion. Well, $50 billion is enough to transform what is a nascent biomanufacturing industry today in the US and build and sustain, and I'll emphasize and sustain, the foundation so that the US can be the global leader in industrial biomanufacturing. And it covers a lot of areas. So we'll talk about it. I'm sure BioMADE is focused very much on scale up and downstream processing and piloting and those types of things. It would certainly help there. It would help companies acquire the capital they need to build the capital assets to manufacture chemicals and materials domestically and get them to the point where they are, in fact, profitable. It would allow there to be dollars to go into modernizing the regulatory system, not just dollars out the door, but dollars that are available to make sure that we have a regulatory system that actually works for industrial biomanufacturing and the wide array of products that we're making. There's a lot of other things you can do with $50 billion. That's what we got to be talking about.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So you are the CEO of BioMADE, and BioMADE was established as a manufacturing innovation institute back in October 2020, but then it was awarded funding by the Department of Defense. You started alluding to it, but can you talk more about the purpose of BioMADE and what were the challenges that led to the creation of BioMADE in the first place?
Sure. So as you said, BioMADE was established in October of 2020. That was right at the tail end of the first Trump administration. BioMADE was established as a Manufacturing Innovation Institute or Manufacturing USA Institute. And so maybe first saying, what is that? What does that even mean? So it's this idea that there are certain manufacturing technology areas that are of strategic national importance, that the federal government makes a decision, an active decision to proactively invest in developing a public-private partnership to curate and expand that manufacturing industry. BioMADE is not the first Manufacturing Innovation Institute or Manufacturing USA Institute. There are now 17 of them, and they cover everything from fabrics and textiles to lightweight machining to flexible electronics to biopharmaceuticals. BioMADE was established to focus on industrial biomanufacturing and really building on the prior, I say 30 years, everyone picks their own number, 30 years of federal investment in modern biotechnology, synthetic biology, engineering biology, CRISPR, all of the tools that came from laboratories that now need to be commercialized. BioMADE was created, and this federal investment came forward after this realization that came in the 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe that in order to get from the laboratory to building profitable companies that are selling biomanufactured products manufactured in the United States, we are really going to need some help. And that was the impetus. That was the core that created BioMADE. And then for the last 4.5 years, we've been building an organization that has been solely focused on bringing that realization into reality.
I know we're going to get deep into it, but for someone who's very new to this, what does biomanufacturing even mean? We talk about it a lot on this podcast. If you don't know anything about it, you can go back and listen to some of the episodes. But if you're lazy, Doug is now going to tell us what is biomanufacturing.
Yeah, there are definitely smarter people that can describe the details of biomanufacturing. So I'm glad you're asking me so I can do it from a 100,000 foot level. In reality, it's actually quite simple until you get into the details. And that is manufacturing chemicals, materials, or other products using biological systems. And sometimes it's easier to compare and contrast. So how do we get chemicals, materials, and other non-biological or non-health related products today? Primarily through chemical manufacturing. Chemical manufacturing is primarily taking typically a petroleum-based feedstock, using chemical processes to then turn it into something that is useful for people. In biomanufacturing, we're essentially doing the same thing. You could use a petroleum feedstock. You can use a gas feedstock. You can use a lot of other feedstocks. from other renewable sources, corn stover, sugar beets, etc., and convert that now using a microorganism like E. coli or yeast or many, many others, typically using fermentation, just like brewing beer, to ultimately get the exact same products, or in some of the more exciting cases, new products you can really only make with biology.
We are excited about what's new and what's possible. Of course, replacing ingredients that are made with petrochemicals with biomanufactured products, that'll be exciting. We could talk about that later, but you're not doing this alone. BioMADE is an organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about who the people are behind BioMADE? Are there people from private industry working with you guys? Is it government officials? Tell us a little bit more about who's working with you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and is frankly the most exciting part about both building and working at BioMADE right now. BioMADE on its own is really nothing. BioMADE exists as a consortium of members that bring together the public sector and the private sector to achieve these ends. So that includes now more than 300 organizations that cover everything from companies as large as Cargill, the largest private company in the United States, to that two-person startup that spun out of a university laboratory last week and everything in between. It includes universities, nonprofit research labs. It includes government labs. It includes government agencies that work with us to really integrate together all of the possibilities that we have. And that is driven by an amazing staff that we have that really takes the input from all of those entities, curates it into something that is really what's best for the industry and industry growth, then establishes its programs and its efforts, pushing back out in the industry to support that member base and the members to come.
That's amazing. I mean, what you're describing to me is an ecosystem that you could look at as being somewhat complicated because on one side, you've got the innovators. You mentioned the two-person startup that just spun out of a university lab. You need biological and chemical engineers to work on scale up. And then on the other end, you mentioned Cargill. We're talking about big consumer products companies, food companies. And that's a very complicated ecosystem from one end to the other. And it really depends on this collaboration, everybody working together. How do you do that? How does BioMADE work with these people who are so different to get these biologically manufactured products to market faster?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at its core, everyone involved in BioMADE has the same end objective: manufacture industrial products using biology in the United States. At the end of the day, you can go to any one of our members and say that. Do you agree with that? Is that a goal? Is that a good goal? Is that why you're participating in BioMADE? Is that why? Every single one will say yes. So at the end of the day, it's about understanding that we really do have a common mission. Then taking a step back and saying, okay, for my organization, what is my piece of that puzzle? Because not everyone can do everything. And putting together, and use the word ecosystem, which is a word we use a lot, and I think the perfect word to describe it, putting that together is what the job of our team is. So we have a relatively complex set of committees and working groups and engagements and meetings and conventions and opportunities to get all of the input from all of these disparate sources, put it together to make it better than the sum of its parts, vet all of that with the membership that we have, then make some actionable decisions. So I'll give you maybe two examples of actionable decisions to make it a little bit more concrete. One is we fund, using federal dollars or dollars we raise from other sources, a lot of projects. These may be technology development projects. These may be commercialization related projects. They may be supply chain related projects. They may be education related projects. There's now more than $200 million of projects out there in the world that BioMADE is managing. Those projects all come from that crowdsourcing. Our team doesn't make them up out of thin air. Oh, I'm interested in this one day. I have lots of interests, but at the end of the day, it really comes from the community itself and then goes out to establish those efforts. At the same time, we've heard from the community that there are major infrastructure challenges in the US. That has come up on your podcast and previous episodes. We're also using that to take input from the community to establish a network of infrastructure to be able to support the industry. But all of it comes from those members and from the broader community, because at the end of the day, if we're not supporting them, we're not going to be successful in that end mission.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. You guys are very busy bringing all these people together. But can you give us some examples of recent notable projects that BioMADE has funded or brought together that's really changing what's happening in the marketplace?
Sure. So maybe I'll give two examples to start, and then we can grow from there. One is a project that actually just ended. It was a 3-year-long project that was led by Georgia Tech, the Georgia Institute of Technology. And the title of the project was Stress Testing Supply Chains and Their Ecosystems. That was this idea of, if we're going to really make a dent in complex global chemical supply chains by using biomanufacturing, we have to understand the intersection between those supply chains and what companies want to do and their industries. And it turns out that is a really complicated matrixed problem that a lot of people scratch the surface on, but very few people dive head deep into the rabbit hole and put together tools that actually help companies succeed. So this team at Georgia Tech led the development of a sophisticated digital simulation platform to really be able to provide input, data-driven input about the possible opportunities to build supply chain resilience using industrial biomanufacturing. So this is just one example of something that can be developed and impact a large sector of the industry and have a positive impact on them. And it's a good example of a good BioMADE project. We have another example, very different, about manufacturing feed additives for poultry. So a new probiotic type product for the poultry industry. There are a large number of issues about raising poultry without antibiotics. And there are major opportunities in biomanufacturing. So this is an example of using biomanufacturing to actually make a whole cell product that can have a serious impact on the poultry industry. And a relatively small company called General Probiotics has been leading this. And they've been so successful that they have been able to use the work that they've done with BioMADE to come up with deals with major players in the poultry industry. Again, getting it over that hump to the point where they're able to make an impact on sectors that go well beyond what we maybe normally think of in biomanufacturing.
I'm also curious about, how does BioMADE, or even some of the companies that you're collaborating with, approach when there's new regulation to ban certain products? So recently, red dye has come under pressure, I guess, in the US. I mean, you can't use it, I don't think, in Europe. But is there a working group or a consortia, or maybe we can brainstorm this right now live? How would you approach something like this, where consumers used to a certain product, it's then removed and that company might require it? So I would love to just hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so BioMADE monitors what's going on in the regulatory space, but we don't necessarily get directly involved in regulation. So if we take the red dye example, what I might say to our members at our annual meeting in a couple of months on this topic is, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like a great business opportunity for someone who is able to biomanufacture alternative red dyes. Biology is really good at making things that are color, by the way. Mm-hmm. Let's go to a flower field. That's amazing. And that biology did that all on its own. That sounds like an amazing business opportunity. There's been a problem that's identified. There's been some regulatory action. We've seen in Europe that there are already bans. This may or may not happen in the US. But what that says is that there is a market opening up. And it's a market that potentially connects back to biomanufacturing. So my question is, what companies are working on that? How are you focused on that? I'll pick another example that's really closer to home, that is more directly related, and that's around PFAS. PFAS has been in the news for a long time. 3M recently announced that it's going to stop manufacturing PFAS-related products. Right now, for a lot of particularly microelectronics applications, there aren't good replacements. That's a big problem. Well, it turns out there are actually some really interesting biomanufactured PFAS replacement products that could be used to solve that problem. And these are examples of ones that can't actually be made any other way. They're made by biology. So now you have a problem in a sector that is well established, the microelectronics industry, that is frankly in a panic over this PFAS thing. Rightfully so. This is a huge problem for them. Now biomanufacturing is able to come in right behind it and say, hey, we have a potential solution for that problem. The challenge is, how do you get that idea of a solution or that early research in a lab, right? How do you get that over the hump to be able to, one, test and validate it with a customer, and two, manufacture enough to make a dent in the industry? We're talking about massive, massive quantities of material. And right now, that's really hard.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
You said, okay, we're going to have an annual meeting. We're going to present these things. And Erum and I have done presentations to big CPGs. And one of the things they ask us, and we proactively tell them, look, you are going to have to manufacture huge quantities of this material. This is a material that possibly the entire industry needs. The thing we need to do is form a consortia. But BioMADE, you can look on the website, you can see the kinds of projects that they're working on. How does someone come to you when it's like, okay, now we've got to do a red dye or we've got to do the PFAS replacement? Either we're a big CPG or a big microelectronics company. We know the entire industry needs this. Could you help us solve this problem? Or if it's the innovator, how are these people coming to you? What's the funnel look like? And how do you guys choose the ones that you want to help solve? Because we want to solve them all.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me give you the mildly unsatisfying answer first, and then I'll make it better. So the mildly unsatisfying answer is that BioMADE tries very hard to not pick winners. So we have 300 members. A lot of them are in a strong position to collaborate and work together, but many of them are competitors. They should be competitors. And we want to see strong industry competition in this area because that's one of the important ways of building an industry. So we have to be careful not to pick winners in certain spaces or not to say, hey, this is where the biggest opportunity is in biomanufacturing and let's all go there. And part of that is what it means to be a nonprofit public-private partnership. And I will acknowledge that sometimes frustrates our members. Sometimes it frustrates government. Sometimes it frustrates podcast hosts. It can be an issue, but the way we handle it is through much more of a bottom-up approach. So we have these member working groups. We have a technical committee. We have commercialization-focused committees of members that they can all volunteer, put in their time to work together. And our members have voting rights. They vote on things. And those are the things we focus on. So if our members, through this mechanism, say, we're hearing from this CPG firm, this is it, we want to really focus on this kind of space, and hey, BioMADE, we want you to spend time, energy, and dollars here, and it comes through that mechanism, we're on it. That is a little bit unlikely to happen. What is more likely to happen is to say, hey, we're hearing this demand signal from these three very disparate potential customers. It leads to these two or three different potential classes of products, classes of molecules. And we say, okay, well, through biomanufacturing, through some sort of fermentation and separations and downstream processing, we can make a bunch of different chemicals and materials that can make an impact. Okay. Are we able to take what seem to be disparate products and boil them down to say, hey, we have these 2, 3, 4, 5 underlying manufacturing technologies that if they were improved or if they were invented, would lower the cost of manufacturing for everyone. Those are the types of projects that we really want to invest in because we're not picking a winner there. We're not saying this part of the industry is going to win over this part. What we're saying is, hey, if everyone is able to do separations a little bit cheaper, then everyone is going to be more competitive in the global market. And because we have spent so little time focused on manufacturing, after spending so much time focused on underlying biological tools, there's just ripe for the picking. There are so many opportunities. So it tends to be an issue of not, oh gosh, how do we figure out what that is? But oh my gosh, there are so many things. We're going to need Karl's $50 billion to actually solve all of that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really a cool approach because what you're saying is it's not just solving a specific problem, but it's also developing a technology that could be used across the board by industry to lower costs and make, let's say, an ingredient or a chemical much more accessible. And with all the benefits that are associated with biomanufacturing, distributed manufacturing, low energy use, blah, 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 whatever. And I say that lovingly. One of the things that we did on purpose was in 2024, we really focused on biomanufacturing. And we've become friendly with people from Synonym and different biomanufacturing companies, Anthea on the healthcare side, and other people who are developing novel kinds of bioreactors. How is it that companies like that end up collaborating with BioMADE?
This is a good opening to talk about a very specific project call that we put out, I think now a year and a half ago, with funding from what was Schmidt Futures is now Schmidt Sciences, one of Eric and Wendy Schmidt's ventures. Through a generous donation, we were able to put out a bioreactor design project call. So we ultimately invested more than $10 million in a series of projects that were very much focused on how do you go from the currently used bioreactor designs that we have, most of which are decades old and have seen relatively modest improvements, to some really novel technologies. If you go to our website, you can see what those projects are. They are ongoing today. Some of them are going to start wrapping up quite soon. And there's some pretty cool technology that comes out of that. Then companies that are working on the next generation of biomanufacturing capacity at the commercial scale, it's a question of evaluating those and saying, hey, is that something that is going to be commercializable and have an impact broadly? I'll pick a different company, one that you didn't mention, but Liberation Labs is building their facility in Indiana. It's a little late to see that parallel through. But if we're all doing this right, there's going to be an awful lot more of that. So how do we make sure we stay ahead on what are long-term capital assets? And that's one of the ways from a technology forward approach that we've taken in doing that.
Incredible. I mean, I love talking about the technology and all the companies that are participating in BioMADE and the consortia and the working groups to accelerate the bioeconomy. But let's talk about the government a little bit. You've been engaged with various government activities, including at the White House, at the Office of Science and Technology, and you're on the Department of Commerce Advisory Committee. How does your experience fit into the work of BioMADE? How are you bridging that relationship between government and enterprise?
Yeah, I mentioned BioMADE's a public-private partnership, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the private part. And I think that makes sense. And it's actually the place we want to start. But there is a public side of a public-private partnership. So first, I should give the disclaimer I always give. I am not speaking for the government. In none of the work and positions that I've held related to government agencies do I speak for the government. With that aside, there are a large number of governmental advisory and consulting type activities that people from our industry really need to get involved in and should get involved in. One that you mentioned at the Department of Commerce, I'm on something called the METAC. Everything in government has to have a good acronym, which is the Materials and Equipment Technical Advisory Committee. And now you're saying, why is the BioMADE guy part of the Materials and Equipment Technical Advisory Committee? Well, it turns out these committees were established a long time ago, and they have to put in new technology areas into existing structures. So most of biotech and biomanufacturing lives there, and they need people. So there are a lot of private sector folks that serve on these advisory committees to be able to provide, in this case, the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, advice in these areas. But if we zoom out and say, well, why is that important? And why did I just use the Department of Commerce as an example? One thing that hasn't come up, one word that hasn't come up in this conversation yet is the bioeconomy. We've talked a lot about technology, we've talked about companies and industry, but we haven't said bioeconomy. And the part of the bioeconomy that I'm the most interested in is the economy part. So if we're not using the tools and technologies and abilities that we have in biology to make broad and meaningful economic impact, we're not doing it right. We spend a lot of time talking about the bioeconomy in other venues. But more recently, I've stopped using the word bioeconomy and I start to think about how is biology having an impact in the economy? Earlier in this conversation, we talked about microelectronics. When you say bioeconomy, do people usually think about microelectronics? No, they don't. Unless they're one of a small number of companies that we talk to,
Right.
but that the broader world doesn't. But we're talking about having biomanufacturing make a meaningful impact on the microelectronics sector. This is where the public sector piece comes in. What the public sector cares about, what government cares about, is making a meaningful impact on the population it serves. And that doesn't come from doing science and technology for science and technology's sake. I say this as someone who started my science career. I'm a physical organic chemist. We are talking about things that I wrote some papers that I hope some other scientists read and are not making a meaningful impact on society until you go 27 steps. And it's super important. And I'm not saying that we should stop doing it. We should. It's absolutely important. But at the end of the day, governments care about making a meaningful impact on society. If we are going to be thinking about the bioeconomy and the economy, we must be talking about how we use biology, harness it, and make a meaningful economic impact by building profitable companies. So when you're talking about government investment, these days you have to draw a line from this investment to profitable companies.
Yeah.
We're good at building companies. It's still pretty hard to build a profitable company. A lot of times getting to profitability is about commercialization exercises. It's about customer validation. It's about customer relationships. It's about offtakes, and it's about the cost of manufacturing. All of those come together to the type of work that BioMADE does, intersecting the public sector work and the private sector work and being the bridge between those two pieces of the puzzle. And one thing I will say about the government side of it is you have to remember government is also people. We just talked about a transition. Government is also people. And the number of people working on bio-related issues in any given federal agency or department is very small. It's just a small number of people. So one of the things that we as a biomanufacturing community do, and one of the things BioMADE spends a lot of time on, is taking all of that crowdsourced information that we have and packaging it up in a way that government can understand, because you're talking to 3 human beings and there's thousands, tens of thousands of people who are all trying to provide that input. That math doesn't work. That is why public-private partnerships can be so important and so valuable, and why we at BioMADE take that part of our work really seriously in serving both the public sector need and the private sector need, because that's how we're going to see positive outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's essential. We tell all entrepreneurs, you need to talk to legislators. You need to be out there educating them as much as you are educating your consumers and your employees, because otherwise they don't know what we're doing or why it matters. But what important messages do you think legislators need to understand about the impact of biology on the economy and its potential growth?
Yeah, I have 2 things that I frequently say to our companies when interacting with legislatures, whether that's members of Congress or state legislatures or local city council. The first is make it about a broad group of people. Your company is doing a thing. How is that thing going to have a meaningful impact on society? Is it going to grow and create jobs in a certain part of the country? Is it going to reduce our reliance on some type of fragile supply chain? Is it going to serve a national or economic security need? What is it going to do in those terms? Talk about your technology, talk about why it's cool, talk about why you're excited about it. That's why most founders get into it in the first place. Bring that authenticity, but don't forget about tying it back to people. The second thing is remember that legislators serve the population. They don't serve any individual. So when you're talking about your company, you are much better off talking about what legislative work that legislator can do to support the industry in a cohesive, coherent, and consistent message from the industry versus focusing on exactly what your company needs at that time. There's a lot of money in this space right now. It's very easy to go to a legislator and say, hey, we're looking for this SBIR grant. We're looking for this. But that's not going to get you as far as saying, hey, we've noticed that the SBIR program at this agency has not funded a project in biomanufacturing in the last 5 years. Because you've done your research and you know that. We think for these reasons, it's really important for the Department of Transportation to be thinking about and funding through their SBIR program biomanufacturing. And we would like you to look into that and do something about it. It's not about your company specifically. Yeah, as soon as you hear that happens, you're going to write your SBIR proposal, and you absolutely should. And you might know about it before others because you're the one who asked for it first. But that really gets legislators thinking, because what it says is that you're coming with something that's more than about just your thing. You're coming about something that's supporting this broader industry and broader movement, and it's something that the legislator can do something about it. It's very hard for them to say, hey, you are going to get that SBIR grant. It's not that hard for them to write a letter to the Department of Transportation that says, hey, you haven't funded a project in biomanufacturing in the last 5 years, and this is a major strategic priority for these reasons, and what's up? Those are the types of things that get the wheels moving that can really be impactful to industries. And the more people that do that, the more opportunity for success we're going to have.
That's such a hot tip, Doug. I mean, we have a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, researchers that are looking for funding, and to be able to position your idea or your company not about your company, but about the general challenge is genius. I mean, it's smart. And we'll have to cut that into a clip and share that on social media, because more people need to hear that type of advice. Is that don't talk about your technology. Talk about the solution and what the vision of the world looks like after your technology is implemented or after the problem is solved. We talk to entrepreneurs about that, and it sounds like it's obvious, but we don't see that getting done as much as it needs to. So very, very, very cool. But we're talking about innovators. We're talking about biomanufacturing. What do you see as the biggest challenge that innovators face when they are trying to scale up production of their products via biomanufacturing? What is the biggest thing you think that if we were to solve it, it would unlock and grow the bioeconomy or the regular economy?
So thank you. It's the regular economy. We want to unlock biomanufacturing solutions that impact the regular economy. So that's exactly the way I think about it. We only have a few minutes, so I can't give you the list of challenges that exist, which is very large for companies. But I'm going to focus primarily on a theme, and that theme is speed. Companies need to move fast to be successful. There are a lot of things that slow companies down. I will take 1 second to just preface why that matters. For many, many founders, entrepreneurs, people in companies know this, but I'm going to bring it up because I think it's so important. If you move slow, then what that means is your labor cost goes up. If it takes you an extra month to get into a facility, I'll come back to that in a second, you're still paying your staff for a month. Those costs add up very, very quickly. So things we can do to speed up are what's most important. Now, the solutions to that can take forever. But one of the solutions, and this is one that BioMADE is working on, is accessing domestic pilot manufacturing infrastructure to be able to scale up. This is an issue that's been ongoing. BioMADE, through its members, identified it since before BioMADE exists, but access to domestic pilot scale facilities. This is one that BioMADE is working on. We have substantial funding to establish a network of pilot and intermediate scale facilities to do this. The challenge is anything related to $100 million plus infrastructure is inherently slow, because you're talking about complicated facilities with steel in the ground that take, at the best of times, 3 to 5 years to fully develop. We've been working on this now for a couple of years, but it's still a couple of years away before things start to open up. But that is one thing. Access to pilot facilities is a big one. Another one is building organizational capabilities and financial plans and performing techno-economic analysis super early. Because if you don't see a path to a viable product that you can sell for more money than you can make, the definition of profitable product, then you're not going to succeed. And right now it can take too long to identify that. Or sometimes founders don't have the skill set coming in because maybe they come from the technology, but not having the business side. And it takes a while to develop that. So that's something BioMADE is trying to help work with founders and say, hey, this is something you've got to do. Here are some assets. We have some internal resources that can help our companies do that. But that is another big challenge. By doing that can allow you to fail fast. And fail fast is part of speed. That's part of it. You are not always going to be successful, but you should get a few shots on goal before your company goes out of business. Right now, it's too many. One shot on goal, you miss, you're done. The other part of this, and this came up earlier in the conversation, is really being able to build a nexus between customers that are willing to establish longer term commitments and partnerships and offtakes at a time where they are taking a little bit more of the risk than they are willing to today. Now, BioMADE's contention here is that our industry hasn't always been the most reliable. So we hurt ourselves when going to those customers earlier on. They may have been willing to take those risks a decade ago. Then we didn't come through. Well, that's not good. So there's a little bit of rebuilding trust. The industry is in a different place. I strongly support, and I make this case to potential large customers all the time, that we are in a different place now. We are like, let's forget about some of the biofuels past.
Oh, yeah.
But that is hard. Building trust is hard. And that's something that's going to need to come with additional work and growth. But those are three areas that I think are just major challenges. And you'll notice I didn't pick a technology solution. These were all speed, access, assets, capital, business, commercialization problems. And at the end of the day, if those are the ones that need to get solved to be successful, those are the ones that need to get solved to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. We have one more question for you, Doug. We've been talking about BioMADE and the growth of the economy as impacted by biology and biological technologies. What's got you most excited?
I am the most excited about opportunity. We are at an inflection point in biotech and biomanufacturing today in the non-health space. And I say this as someone who is neither a bio person nor a manufacturing person. I said before, I'm a physical organic chemist, and I never really did manufacturing. I did government advisory work before this and early synthetic biology. The reason I do this, the reason I am personally excited about this and invested in it, is that I think right now we are at an inflection point across the globe to say the next decade or two are going to be driven by advances in commercialization in industrial biotechnology and biomanufacturing. Now it's a question of who is going to lead it, who is going to drive that success, and who's going to be the most well-positioned globally to be competitive. And I think that should be the United States. I firmly believe we developed the technologies primarily here. We have been doing this for an awfully long time. But if we don't take the bull by the horns and actually do something about it in a long-term strategic way to be meaningfully globally competitive, it's not going to be us. And the work we do, say the last year to 18 months and the next probably 2 years, is going to set the stage for the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. And that's where we're at. And I do that because I think we have a chance right now to set that stage. Then we can watch it be successful as we all grow old.
Amazing. Well, Doug, thank you so much for taking the time today. We've wanted to have you on for a long time. We want to get you back so that we can go into even more detail on some of the projects and hear about your progress. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Erum. Thanks, Karl. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, look forward to talking to you again soon. Erum, what did you think of that interview with Doug?
I loved it. Wow. I love the fact that he's bringing all of these players together. For us, we see the companies, we are talking to people that are on the policy side, on the government side. We're talking to funders and academics. And it's really exciting to see an organization really pulling all of this together. And during the interview, I really resonated with Doug's rallying cry, where he said, we are at a point in biomanufacturing that it's not necessarily the technology, because we know that technology is there. But the most challenging thing is really bringing business and the public side together and creating the relationships and gaining trust across this ecosystem. It's exciting that he's identified that. He's talking about that publicly. We say that with our clients when we talk about partnerships. We know the importance of it. And those that are listening that know us know that we put a lot of value in creating relationships and authentic ones, that we know that there's going to be win-win situations when we work together.
Yeah, I think on the innovator side, we know everybody is moving as fast as they can and has these fantastic products, and not everybody's able to scale. And scale is really important to get price down. We have seen a few companies able to do that, but I think with initiatives like BioMADE, it should accelerate that and make it much easier for these innovators to get their products into the market. Because on the market side, in many cases, the big players, the big consumer product goods companies, they're not going to buy unless they can buy hundreds of thousands of pounds or hundreds of thousands of liters of a particular product.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. They work on higher scales and these biotech solutions need to rise up to that, but it's got to start somewhere. These companies can also do limited runs using some of the ingredients or products or materials that some biotech companies make. And I've seen some companies do that, whether it's on the food side, limited runs of some cultivated ingredients, and then they scale up. It's like the whole world of the Impossible Burger. But yes, I agree with you. And I also thought that what was really interesting with our conversation with Doug was when I asked him about the challenges, he identified speed as a challenge, which we need to make this transition as soon as possible. We always say the B2B sales cycle in a complex industry is 12 to 18 months. And a lot of that is relationship building when it comes to sales on the business scale. So to be able to accelerate that is hugely important. But one of the things I think is also a challenge, which I'm sure Doug will agree about as we talk to people in the industry, is the challenge is coming on the demand side. For consumers to understand that there are new ways of creating products and that they want that, and they need to express that to the companies that are making the products that they're purchasing. Just like there's been the transition away from plastic materials and packaging and the reduction of different ingredients being used on the consumer side. I think that's going to be very interesting. What about you? What did you think about the challenge of speed versus demand?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fine balance. We know firsthand that startups work very quickly, and we also know that bigger companies tend to be a little bit more conservative in how quickly they work. Their pace is very different. So how do you meet in the middle? We know that the big companies are looking for innovators and innovative products, but they also work at their own pace. Mm-hmm. Doug is right in that speed to getting to scale is going to be very helpful for the innovators. But does that mean that on the demand side, on the big company side, are they going to be able to keep up with the production of these new products? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a lot of times these products are purchased because there's a need for them. We need cleaning products. We need toilet paper. We need medicines and food and everything. So we're going out to stores or on Amazon and we're just buying them because we need them. But even though I need a cleaning solution, I want it to be non-toxic. I want the smell not to be overpowering, but to be delightful. So we're coming down to the needs and wants argument, wanting better functionality or better products. That's what biotech can afford. Not only better functionality and better products, but also, of course, healthier for the planet, which some people want more than others. I think everybody wants a healthier planet, but in terms of prioritizing their purchases, some people are just prioritizing the cost, of course. But when people start seeing better functionality, they're going to want it. And then it's going to be exciting. That demand is coming from the desire versus just that's all there is out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's going to be exciting to see the other initiatives that BioMADE's coming out with. They do have a lot right now. You can see their projects on their website, which of course is in the show notes. But we'll be keeping track of Doug and the team at BioMADE. I'm sure we'll be talking about them more and having people on this podcast that are part of the BioMADE consortium. We already have. It's interesting to see a lot of people or the companies that were represented on our podcast are part of the BioMADE consortia. But this is another step to being able to grow everything we need to sustain our lives. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to stay in touch with us, please reach out to us, whether it's by calling us. We have the Grow Everything hotline, or we have all of our social channels in the show notes. Exciting episodes coming your way.
Thank you. That's the pod.